Hi guys, Andrew Hutchinson here, and today for my channel, The Book Hutch, I'm going to be making a video about something that a lot of people probably wouldn't find too terribly exciting, which is library budgets and financing. Woo! The reason I wanted to make this video today, even though it's not the most glamorous topic in the world, is because when I started working at a library, I had no idea how library budgets worked, where they got their money from, and also I was given a budget when I was put in charge of programming as an adult services librarian. And so I had a lot to learn really quick about managing my own budget within that framework. I was a teacher, so I came from the education background, and education budgets and library budgets actually have some similarities to them, but they're still quite different. And so I just wanted to break down in this video what a library budget is, where it comes from, and then how to keep track of one if you're a librarian and you want to learn more how to use it. So if any of those things interest you, please continue to watch the video as follows. So some things to keep track of within the library, just checking my notes there. Library money comes from tax revenue. It can be generated in a few different ways. My library, it comes from property taxes in the local area, and we have our own library district, meaning we generate it and get it directly from the taxpayers, and we are not attached to a town. Some libraries are attached to their local municipality and they get their money from their town or their city. We are more independent. And so your library, local library may differ than that. But generally it comes from some sort of tax revenue, which like when I worked in schools, the same way. And there's some perks to that. So you can get, your entire chunk of money and you can plan what you want to do with that money once it's allocated to you. Even though the amount is going to change every year. So for instance, I know about a decade ago in this area where I am in Southwest Colorado, there was an oil and gas boom and a lot of companies were here involved with that. And so the libraries got a lot of funding. Now it's been slowly dropping while those companies have left the area. And so libraries have had to figure out what to do with that loss of revenue. Sometimes they have asked local taxpayers for increases, and sometimes libraries just invest their own money in certain ways and have backup funds. So libraries do lots of similar and different things when it comes to money, but that's generally the basis of where their money comes from. Once libraries get that giant chunk of money, well, I shouldn't say giant, but it's a sum, and they get that money, they then, of course, break it down. And so you have to pay your employees, and so that's a certain chunk of the money you have to spend every year. Some of it is going to go to programming, whether it's adults, kids, anything like that. Technology. So normally most libraries have technology they have to keep rotating because every certain number of years that technology is going to either break or be out of date. And so libraries normally are changing out their technology on a semi-frequent basis if they have the money for it. There's obviously money that's put in for building and maintenance upkeep because things will break. I remember just a few months ago, for instance, all of a sudden one day our plumbing was having problems and we had to call a lot of people and snake a lot of drains, and we got it all fixed, but it's just those things that you don't expect where suddenly the plumbing goes out. And so you're always going to have those types of issues, so you need funds for that. And then really a big chunk of the money is going to go towards your materials. So we're always buying books, audiobooks, DVDs, kits for kids to use, technology for our Idea Lab makerspace. So the materials are a big part of that. And that is why I always encourage people when they're in a community with a library to go to that library and engage with them, because really your money for tax is being spent in that library on materials. So I am always advocating to go obviously to a local bookstore and buy your favorite books and buy movies and stream Netflix, but also at the same time, utilize your library. If you rent even just 4 DVDs a year, you're probably making back the money that you spent without even knowing it on that library. And if you go into your library and there are certain books and materials, DVDs, what have you, that they don't have, ask them to order it for you, and they will. A lot of times the libraries then will purchase to have a copy, or they'll at least get it from another library. But as our library, we represent our community. And so if we don't have a certain section of books that people want, they need to tell us and say, hey, I would love to see you ordering more of this. And we will listen because it's your money that we're using. Otherwise, we're gauging on what is popular around the country, what is popular in our instance in Colorado, what other libraries are ordering, what are also just our personal librarian interests are. So I can think of a few examples. So I remember when I first started, I and a few of the other librarians just mentioned that we all love the Outlander books, but we didn't own the Outlander series. So our director bought the Outlander series and it's been widely checked out. That kind of came from our own personal interest, where we've also had people come in and say, hey, I would love to see more books. This is actually true on mushrooms. And in Colorado, I would like to know more about the mushrooms that grow in Colorado. And so we've ordered more books on the mushrooms in Colorado. And so getting feedback from anyone is going to help a library. So definitely voice what you'd like to see in your library, especially since in your community, especially since they're probably using some of your money anyway. And then use them, check out materials, and make your money back. Is just at least my own personal advice. Speaking of public input, most libraries are pretty transparent. They will put their budgets on their website, and they cannot approve budget and budgetary items without consulting a board of directors. So the library's main director or their financial supervisor will have to go to the board, which is a group of community members that oversee the direction the library goes in, and they have to ask the board whenever they want to spend certain amounts of money or at least get their budget approved. And normally there will be meetings where the public is invited to give their input, and a lot of times in a lot of libraries, public doesn't show up. So if you're very interested in what libraries in your area are doing, go look up their budget, ask questions. I'm not saying go audit them, but at least if you're curious, look up what's going on and say, what is my library doing with the money that they're getting? And if I have any ideas on what my library can do or what I'd like to see, talk to the director, go to board meetings, be involved, because again, libraries really enjoy hearing from their communities. So that's a lot of the general overview of how libraries get their money and how they sort of break it down. And no matter what they want to break it down to use it on, the board has to approve it. Now here's the side on the librarian side. So for instance, I've talked about before, I'm an adult services librarian and I'm in charge of a lot of programming. So for instance, I get a certain amount of that programming budget that's sort of allocated to me to spend. So normally I have a certain number, and that is what I can spend within a library year. So that's a helpful piece of information to have. If you don't know how much you can spend, it's kind of a shot in the dark. So definitely make sure you have conversations with your director or financial person to figure out what you can spend. And then you sort of need to figure out for events that you plan what the general amount you normally spend is. So if you have an author come, do you have an honorarium that you're going to pay them? Or are they going to have an extra speaking fee? If you're going to provide food, how much does food normally cost? If you're going to provide materials for an arts and crafts class, how much is that? And a lot of it will just sort of be estimation, and then you kind of have to figure it out as you go. Obviously, the more you program, the longer you do it, the more you know what to expect. I think the biggest thing is to just absolutely keep track of everything that you spend as you go. So you have your estimates, but then you're going to find out once you get to that event what you're actually spending, and that you need to keep all of your receipts. So even if you have to give your receipts to someone else for them to have, I always make copies of all my receipts. I digitize them. I put them in folders. I keep track not only by year, by month, but also by what the event was. I created a Google Sheets page where for every single event that I have, I go in and I type up I look at all of my receipts. So I spent this much on a person coming to talk about something. I spent this much on the food that I provided, etc. And so you calculate all of those. I then can break it down by, all of my author events for this year in total cost this much. All of my arts and crafts classes cost this much. And then you can also break it down by month. And so there's many different ways to generate data, but always keep track of the actual receipts, what you spent, when you spent it, etc. Just to cover yourself in case anyone ever asks what you spent, where and why. And that can be a tricky piece because, for instance, I'm in charge of all adult programming, but sometimes another coworker of mine will carry out and do a program of what they want to do for other adults. And I need to remember to get those receipts from them, how much they spent, because I'm still in charge. So even if I didn't do it and I wasn't in charge of it, it doesn't mean that I can just neglect knowing about that. So sometimes it takes a lot of communication, finagling, trying to figure out what you're in charge of and how to get all of that information from people. But again, the more you do it, the more you'll find whatever system works for you and keeping track of everything. Lastly, I would say the number one piece of advice I have learned in budgeting within libraries, and this is large library scale and also my own budget as a programmer, is I'm the type of person, I was raised by a very fiscally conservative mother who always said, if you don't have the money, don't spend it, for one, but even if you do, always save as much as you can. So I legitimately didn't get a credit card until I was about 24 or 25 years old. And I tried to go rent my first apartment and they said, you don't have any credit. And I said, oh yeah, I don't borrow anything. And they said, well, you need to, because we need to know you're trustworthy. And I said, but I've been responsible. I've saved. I've only ever used what was in my bank account. And they said, that's not how the world works. And to a degree, that's true within libraries. But the point I'm going to get is I'm a person who tries to save as much money as I can because I see that as responsible. In the library world, though that's a noble feat to have, it doesn't necessarily work in the same way. So if, let's say, your director or financial person projects you $5,000 for your programming budget, let's just throw that number out there. They're expecting you to spend around $5,000 because that's what they're giving you to use for the benefit of the public. You are putting on programs that are going to bring people into the library, teach them something new, etc. In my mind, that would be, okay, I have $5,000 to work with, but I'm only going to spend $3,000 and I'm going to get a gold star because I saved $2,000 for the library. The only problem is that money doesn't necessarily roll over so well. And so I've had conversations with my director, especially when I first started, where I was talking to her and I said, look, we can cut corners here and we can do this and that. And she went, no, sweetie, you need to spend that money. Now, obviously, don't go over wildly because that will be seen as irresponsible unless you're going to go get a grant to help supply extra funds for a really big program you're doing. But otherwise, really just try to spend right to that line, because if you don't, I have to go back to my board and say, hey, remember when you approved extra money for my programming person? That was great of you, but they didn't actually need it. And then maybe the next year, you're going to want to do a really massive program and the board won't approve that because they'll say, well, you've never spent that much before. Why would we do that now? That's just one case. So really, and this is what I've seen too with libraries, is that magic of if you have the money, spend just enough to get close enough to that line to show that it was justified, that you used the money that was given to you and you used it responsibly. But don't underspend, but also don't overspend. Granted, in libraries, a lot of times they will apply for grants, which is a very strange process. What I have found is it's either so simplistic that you fill out a one-page piece of information and the money can show up, or you have to do 10 pages of very extensive research and description, and sometimes trying to turn them in on federal websites is an absolute nightmare. And then you can get rejected by not turning something into a PDF by accident. And so grants can be tricky, but sometimes those also exist to supplement something that you want to use for your library, which is absolutely great. A lot of libraries do that. But again, it just depends. So Basically, bottom line within this video, libraries get their money from taxpayers. We want to use it in the best interest of the community. So please, if you're a member of the public, engage with us. Tell us how you want us to spend your money on materials, on programs, additions to our building, whatever you feel like is necessary. And as librarians, if you have your own budget to work with, keep track of absolutely everything, every receipt you can, by month, by date, by program type. Use your data, study it, know what you can do in the future to improve. And like I said, it seems like the best way to use it is to spend as close to maxing out with what budget you are given, so it shows that you use the money, but not wildly underspending, but also not wildly overspending unless you're going to supplement that with grants. So that is what I have found in working with libraries and working with budgets so far. Again, if you've made it this far, I commend you. I know this conversation is probably not the most interesting thing out there, but again, if you're a member of the public and you're wondering how your library near you is spending its money, or you're thinking of becoming a librarian, or you're already a librarian that's trying to work with money and figure it out, I hope any of this advice was valuable to you. I'm going to keep making library videos in the future, and as always, feel free to comment below. Let me know your thoughts on budgets, budget ideas, what you'd like to see in your local library, or if you're a librarian, any tips you have on how you keep track of your money and any other budgetary advice. Also, feel free to like and subscribe, and have a great rest of your day, everyone, and I will see you later. Bye.